Today we're going to be predicting how Ruben Amorim is going to set up in his first Manchester United game against Ipswich Town this weekend, because I've seen loads of people talking about his tactics, but nobody talking about the injury list or about the first training session and what that has revealed to us this week. We'll also have a look at why I think United might operate with a rather surprising number 9, a player that nobody else has really spoken about playing there. So today in front of me, I've got the tactics board. I've got his most used Sporting CP 11 so far this season. We're going to go through and sort of replace player by player, depending on who's fit, who's on form, and who should be starting. Now, in yesterday's training footage, we saw Tom Heaton lining up in goal because Onana hasn't yet arrived back from international break, but he will be starting in goal. Andre Onana, of course, the current clean sheet holder in the Premier League with, I think, 5. But some interesting narratives around Israel is when you delve into him a little bit more, very rarely on the ball. He's in the bottom 1% of all goalkeepers in Europe's top 7 leagues for touches, which is definitely not where Onana is. He's in sort of the top 50%, taking over double the amount of touches that Franco Israel does. So it'll be interesting to see how involved Onana is in build-up play and whether or not it mirrors and drops off like Franco Israel's did. Because classically in a Ten Hag system, Onana has been asked to do a lot of progression. Whenever he's on the ball, Onana, he's looking for this ball over the top, he's looking for this ball over the top. For me, he takes too long on the ball. So I would like to see a little bit less of Onana on the ball, despite the fact he is excellent on it. Let's go into the backline then, because the training footage we saw yesterday started to unveil the formation. First and foremost, it was very clearly a back 3 he was working on, and also some of the personnel that was being used in different positions. First and foremost, let's start with the right centre-back though, and that is his most used centre-back this season, De Bast. Very athletic, able to cover ground both going forward and in reverse. Excellent on the ball, being able to fire balls into Trincao, play simple little round the corner knocks into Hulmand. In the training ground footage we saw yesterday, that was Lenny Yoro. Lenny Yoro was being asked to do that. Do we think Lenny Yoro is going to be fit enough to operate against Ipswich straight away? I have my doubts. He's coming back from a significant injury. Of course, it was a broken metatarsal. He's been out for over 3 months. He's just returned to team training over 10 days ago. Do United throw him straight into a very physical encounter with a player like Liam Delap, who we know wants to run down these channels, run in behind, test players physically? I think it would be a risk physically to start Lenny Yoro. I'd love to see it. Don't get me wrong. In an ideal world, Lenny Yoro would be starting in this role. He's naturally athletic. He's excellent on the ball. Great covering pace. I think the future is obviously Lenny Yoro in this right centre-back role. But against Ipswich, I'm not so sure. So could it potentially be Matthijs de Ligt? Now, everybody has talked about Matthijs de Ligt being in this Diamande role, the central centre-back, and that probably is where his future lies because he is slightly slower than a player like Lenny Yoro, who has excellent covering speed. But we saw Matthijs de Ligt in that 2020 season playing for Juventus, operating in a back 3, playing as the right centre-back. Lots of people have talked about his usage as a central centre-back in a back 3, but it was actually Bonucci who was doing the Diamande central centre-back role, while Matthijs de Ligt was playing as a right centre-back. I think they had Danilo in that left central defensive role. So he has got a history of doing it. Does he have the covering pace to do it? In the long term, maybe not. But he's fit. He's on form. I think he's really been one of United's bright sparks at the start of this season. And I can see him starting in the right centre-back role. I'm going to say that Matthijs de Ligt, in my prediction, starts right centre-back. Across the course of the season, goes to central centre-back, and Lenny Yoro comes into this role. So with de Ligt potentially coming in as a right centre-back this week because of fitness issues, I think there's a large case that Johnny Evans starts as the central centre-back. In yesterday's training footage, we saw that was the case. He's got an excellent passing range off both his left and his right foot, particularly for a central striker that's going to look to challenge these channels when United have to split the play and the wing-backs move up to here. I think Johnny Evans is a really viable candidate to play the central defensive option. Harry Maguire would be as well, but of course he hasn't yet resumed team training. He is out long term. And we saw Victor Lindelof during the international break come off with what looked like a fairly serious injury. So we've got Yoro still coming back to fitness. We've got Lindelof out. We've got Martinez coming back with an injury from the international break, a back problem. Maguire also out long term. The defensive options aren't that deep. And I'm going to say it. Johnny Evans has been United's best centre-back this season. You know, I've seen man of the match performances in big games. Think of Villa Park away. He was absolutely the best player on the pitch that day. Yes, he doesn't have the covering pace, but you'd hope the experience. Of course, he's played in a back three at Leicester, and the fact he's the central centre-back with two flanking him means his speed is covered for a little bit more. I'm going to go for Johnny Evans in my prediction to start as central centre-back. I don't think he's a long-term option there. I expect the league to play there, but no doubt this weekend I'd be happy with that. The left-sided centre-back's really interesting. Obviously, Inacio loves to drive forward, doesn't he? A little bit like Bastoni for Inter Milan. You'll often find him up in these sort of areas, allowing Araujo to get on the outside, Gonçalves to move a little bit further forward. Who can do that for United? Well, there's no doubt Lisandro Martinez can, and he feels like the obvious candidate. He is a really, really good progressive pass. You can expect him to split the lines into the defensive midfielder, potentially even further up into the number 10 role. However, we've got fitness issues here. He's returned from the international break with that continued back problem. Is he going to be fit enough? Well, if not, the answer could well be Luke Shaw. In yesterday's training footage, we saw Luke Shaw being utilised as a left-sided centre-back. Now, of course, we have seen that in the past. Under Erik ten Hag, actually in a back two, he was playing as a left-sided centre-back, and it was really effective. The one positive for Luke Shaw, if he's going to play as a left-sided centre-back, is it's a lot less strain on his body. When he's being asked to play in this left wing-back role, it's extremely physical. You're almost a winger in the Amorim system. You're going to be playing extremely high. You have to have the intensity to get back and play in the defensive position. You have to cover into midfield. That's a lot on Luke Shaw's body when we're looking at a player with a similar injury record to Anthony Martial. So that's my early prediction, that Lisandro Martinez is used in the left-sided centre-back role. If he's struggling, or in the long term, I wouldn't be surprised to see Luke Shaw come in there as a rotation for Martinez. I think he offers really, really strong traits in the air, on the ball, very physical. And my one worry for Martinez, to be honest with you, is this space here. When the ball is played into this left channel, does he have the covering pace? Quite a few times we've seen Martinez come across to this touchline, be beaten as he lunges in, and then there is just bags of room. The centre-backs get dragged across, and there's endless space at the back post. That can't happen in a back three. So I'm a little bit worried about Martinez's covering pace in the flanks, but this weekend, I'm predicting him to start. Okay, let's come into the defensive midfield positions. Now, in the team training, we saw yesterday that it was Casemiro playing as the deepest line midfielder, and Kobbie Mainoo playing alongside him. Now, this is interesting because quite a few players haven't yet returned from the international break, have they? Particularly one we think is going to be a big favourite, Manu Ugarte. Now, Manu Ugarte, of course, has operated under Ruben Amorim, so it feels like the obvious fit for him to replace Hjulmand, who kind of replaced Ugarte in the first place. This defensive midfielder has to be highly combative. He has to be able to press really high and win the ball all over the pitch, which is basically what Ugarte specialises in. I think he will probably play in that role. Let's get rid of Hjulmand, and we'll see basically exactly what we saw from him, probably be on this side, exactly what we saw from him at Sporting. A player that is going to be asked to do an absolute bucket load. But what about the Braganza role? The number 8 who wants to push a little bit higher up the pitch, wants to dictate the game a little bit, wants to progress it with his carries. Well, obviously, that's Kobbie Mainoo. And we saw in yesterday's training footage, Amorim playing particularly close attention to Mainoo, giving him one-to-one focus on how to receive the ball in certain areas. But Kobbie Mainoo has just rejoined team training as well. Is it a risk to utilise him this quickly, this early in a Premier League game? I think it probably is. Honestly, if I think long-term, it's going to be Mainoo. If I think short-term, I can see Casemiro and Ugarte both operating in the defensive midfield against Ipswich. Casemiro's numbers have really popped when he's played a little bit higher. Particularly at Manchester United, he's done a lot of good work around the edge of the box, either creatively or in terms of goal scoring, arriving late in the box, scoring with headers, taking shots from outside the area. Take, for instance, Casemiro's shots. He's in the top 5% of midfielders in Europe's top 5 leagues for shots. That's not a trait of an out-and-out defensive midfielder, which he's classically been labelled as. I think he's actually going to play as an 8 in this system when Mainoo is not available. He's done that in the past, and I don't think Amorim's going to want to change too much. This double pivot has worked recently under Ruud van Nistelrooy. They found a little bit of a partnership. Mainoo's injury might give this an opportunity. Okay, so that brings us to the wing-backs, which really aren't wing-backs. You know, Quenda and Araujo, both classically wingers. Quenda in particular, throughout the youth ranks at Sporting, has been an out-and-out winger. He's a left-footed, right-sided player, wants to play super high, wants to attack the box. But can you afford to do that in the Premier League? Can you afford to have two wingers playing at wing-back in the Premier League, or are you going to be exposed? Now, Araujo is very intense with his off-the-ball work, very intense on the ball. For Uruguay, against Colombia, for instance, we've seen him playing as a left winger, but more recently as a left wing-back. He's very versatile, but classically he's attacking too. And at 17, the trust in Quenda has been huge from Ruben Amorim. You know, this is a player who is a huge carrier, a 1v1 merchant. Bottom 2% though for his defensive contribution in Europe's top 7 leagues. He doesn't want to go this way, which I do think you have to do in the Premier League. So I would be surprised if that isn't Mazraoui. Maybe I'm going to get proved wrong this weekend, but surely cannot afford to have 2 wingers and 3 forwards playing away at Ipswich Town. It feels like there's bags of room to be exposed in behind, despite the fact we want to be really dominant on the ball. I'm not sure you can do that in the Premier League. For me, Mazraoui offers a nice mix of defensive contribution. He's one of the highest volume tacklers in the Premier League. He's top 1% there. He has won more ground duels than any player in the league, percentage-wise, this season. And he's excellent on the ball. You know, a really good, composed passer, decent in 1v1s. He's been better than Diallo at the start of the season. So I would go Mazraoui at right back and Diallo benched. And what that might mean is that in the left wing-back slot, you are allowed a slightly more attacking option. If Mazraoui is a little bit more controlled, can tuck into midfield, is good on the ball as a passer, maybe you can experience a winger at wing-back. But who's that going to be? Well, we actually saw Anthony in the training clips yesterday playing as a right wing-back. I don't see that happening long-term. I potentially see Garnacho playing in the left wing-back Araujo slot against Ipswich. Now, as I said earlier, you have Quenda in the Sporting side, who's a left-footed right wing-back. And then you, of course, have Araujo, who's a left-footed left wing-back. So both of the wing-backs are the same foot. Mazraoui and Garnacho, both right-footed. But could you flip it? So you have Garnacho as a right-footed left wing-back who can come all the way to the byline if he needs to, but can also come inside, can offer that underlapping run. We saw it for Sporting against Manchester City when Araujo played a neat little bit of play and then underlapped into the box to score his goal. Could we see that from Garnacho with his pace and his ability? I think we could. I think United will be brave under Ruben Amorim. It's very possible that we could see 2 wingers here. But with Mazraoui's ability as a winger, I don't think you need to. So with the volume of shots that Garnacho's able to get off, his ability to take players on in 1v1s being really high, a great carrier of the ball, I'm going to go as a prediction, Garnacho and Mazraoui. Could we see Terrell Malacia? I mean, we saw Terrell Malacia in the training footage. He played for the under-21s the other day. It looks like he's back to fitness. Could we see Malacia? He is extremely intense, but he hasn't played football in over 500 days, I think. Harry Amass, potentially, could he be an option? Maybe, but very young. I think Garnacho is going to be risked. So that brings us to the forward line. Let's talk about Gonçalves because he is really the creator, the goal threat from the number 10 positions. Over the last 4 seasons, he's got 26 goal involvements, 17 goal involvements, 26 goal involvements, 23 goal involvements. You know, he's operating at nearly 1 non-penalty expected goals and assists per 90. Not particularly fast, but very skillful and deadly around the edge of the area. To me, this just rings of Bruno Fernandes playing in there. Not massive amounts of pace, but let's get him in and around the box. Let's get him creative. I don't want to see Bruno Fernandes in here with these Hail Mary passes we've been seeing over the last few seasons to a player running in behind, a ridiculous switch up. No, I want to see Bruno creating like we saw for the Højlund goal earlier in the season. For me, Bruno Fernandes will play where Pedro Gonçalves plays. What about Trincao then? Now, this is a difficult position, but there are 2 options, in my opinion. One is Mason Mount, In the training footage again, we've seen Mason Mount operating in this role. We've seen him play his best football in this role for Chelsea. In Thomas Tuchel's 3-4-3, playing as the sort of right forward in this half space. He's an excellent presser, and that is something United will probably need to utilise, because does Garnacho have the physicality and the energy to get up and down here all day? Mason Mount could be a very viable option. If he's fit, Mason Mount might well start the first game. But does he have the technical on-the-ball ability of Amad? You think of Trincao classically as a winger, but in this sort of inverted wide man role, he has the freedom to drift wide, to get in behind, to get on the ball short as well. He's a really tricky dribbler who has just started to contribute for fun. Again, last season it was 15 goal involvements. He's already got 11 this season. Now, the reason that I think Amad might get the nod ahead of Mount is that Mount's, number one, returning from injury. Number two, he's just the most on-form player at the club. You know, how do you drop Amad Diallo after his most recent performances? He's been a one-man army out there. Off the ball, a press leader. On the ball, excellent with his back to goal. Good in tight spaces. Great creative numbers. A real good connection with Bruno. Recently, those two have been playing some lovely football together. So I wouldn't want to change that too much. For me, Amad starts against Ipswich. He has to. There are arguments maybe to be made. Could he play in the wing-back role? Mason Mount plays inside and Mazraoui drops out. But I think it would leave us a little bit exposed in these channels in the Premier League. So I'm going to stick with Mazraoui, Amad in the 10, and Mason Mount coming back from injury on the bench. And that leaves the number 9 slot, doesn't it? The Victor Gyökeres position. Lots of people have instinctively thought Rasmus Højlund's going to play there. He wants to run the channels. I hate seeing Rasmus Højlund receive the ball in here, back to goal, 40 yards, wrestling with the defender. And I feel like, to be honest with you, that's all we've seen for the last 12 months. And because he's receiving the ball in these positions, it's really meant his numbers have tumbled. He's taking bottom 2% of European strikers for shots. He's only taking 1 shot a game. He's taking less shots a game than Casemiro. You know, higher the shot volume tends to equal the more goals you score. The highest shot volume in the Premier League, of course, it's Erling Haaland. Rasmus Højlund has to up that in that number 9 role if he's going to be the guy to play there. And in the long term, he might well be. But in the short term, is he? Against Ipswich, this is the team we're predicting. I can see Marcus Rashford starting in the number 9 against Ipswich Town. Yes, he hasn't scored goals this season and he's struggled, but one of his biggest issues under Erik ten Hag was receiving the ball too close to the touchline. He tended to pick the ball up out here and had to beat 2 or 3 men, either outside or inside, and try and get a shot off. Can we see Rashford closer to goal, picking the ball up in these sort of areas and causing problems? Absolutely. I saw yesterday in the training footage again, Marcus Rashford was being used as a 9. He wasn't being used as one of these 10s, which I've seen some people predicting earlier in the week. For me, Rashford is going to play as a 9 under Ruben Amorim. The one concern we have is, can he press? Is he going to want to press? A player that has to lead the press, is that Marcus Rashford? There are major doubts there. There are no doubts, though, that he's the only forward in United's roster that has any experience of scoring consistent goals. You know, no other player on this list has scored 30 goals in a season. No other player on this list has really touched 20 goals in a season, other than Bruno. So Rashford might well be relied upon as the goal scorer in the 9, being asked to play a little bit higher up the pitch and being asked to make these runs into the channels consistently, which he actually does okay. When he's out wide, we often see him curving these runs in behind. When he's out on the right, we often see him curving these runs in behind. And he scored a lot of goals from those positions. So are we going to see him in the 9, curving from there, looking to attack the box late? I think we are. Against Ipswich, I'm going to predict that Rashford starts at the 9. Not necessarily something we're going to see long term. That might well end up being Højlund. I'm going to guess this is the 11 that starts the first game of the season under Ruben Amorim. So we've got Onana, De Ligt, Evans, Martinez, Ugarte, Casemiro, Garnacho, Mazraoui, Bruno, Amad and Rashford. Now in the long term, no doubt, Yoro comes in there, De Ligt goes in there, Evans drops out. That could potentially be short if Martinez can't cover these channel runs. But Amad is the player I'm most excited about in this system. Who are you most excited about in this system? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, hit subscribe. We'll see you later. Goodbye.